Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Eerie News. Today is May 17th, 2024, Friday, May 17th, 2024. And let's look at first story. What do they call them? Strange coincidences, if that's what they indeed turn out to be. First story is titled The Ides of March and a Series of Unfortunate Events. The Ides of March is linked to the assassination of Caesar in 44 BC. However, there were other tragedies that were marked by the full moon, heralding the arrival of spring in the northern hemisphere. The Ides of March in the ancient world heralded the arrival of spring, the renewal of earth, and a promise of life. In Rome, the feast of Anna Perina was celebrated to complete the circle of the year happily. Sacrifices were made to her publicly and privately to assure a healthy year. This date was important for an agrarian society, and soldiers upon retiring were given farmland to work. In the Roman era, debts would have to be settled at this time. In 44 BC, according to Plutarch, a historian and a priest at the temple of Apollo in Delphi, Caesar was warned by a seer that harm would come to him. He didn't heed the prophecy, and he was stabbed 23 times in a conspiracy that included at least 60 powerful Romans. This event marked the beginning of the Roman Empire and the end of the Roman Republic and sparked civil war. The date held a symbolic meaning for Brutus, Cassius, and others involved in the murder plot. Another important factor was that Caesar would leave in 3 days to join a military campaign against Parthia. The Senate would meet on the Ides of March, and this would place Caesar within grasp of the assassins. Brutus, whose name was linked with betrayal like Judas Iscariot, committed suicide 2 years later, and within a dozen years, many of the conspirators had been killed. The Ides of March was unfortunate for others besides Julius Caesar. These are some of those events. This is back in the year 1360, a raid on Sussex. The Hundred Years' War had pitted France and England against each other. A French raiding party attacked the port of Winchelsea in Sussex and began a 2-day spree of rape, pillage, and murder. King Edward III, who was pillaging France at that time, then launched a reprisal attack. The war ended in 1453. And again, this raid was carried on at the Ides of March. Then this other incident occurred in 1889. It was the Samoan cyclone. The effect of the cyclone was catastrophic, and the ships in the bay evacuated only at the last minute. Several ships made it out of the mouth of the bay in Apia, and Samoa was damaged with some loss of life. However, 6 warships, 3 American and 3 German who stayed in the harbor, were totally destroyed. The death toll was well over 200 soldiers. I guess I didn't realize what time of the year it was. Next one. This was pretty heavy. Tsar Nicholas II abdicates his throne in 1917. Says Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate his position as the last in the line of a 304-year-old royal dynasty. In 1918, the Bolsheviks murdered the entire family, including the children, by executing them before a firing squad. Of the House of Romanov's 65 members, 47 survivors went into exile abroad. This event ushered in the Bolshevik rule. The final fate of the royal family remained a mystery for many years. After Nicholas was removed from power, he along with his family were taken into custody by the provisional government. Their titles were stripped from them, and they were held in Alexander Palace in Tobolsk, Siberia. Once the Bolsheviks came into power in October 1917, the royal family's condition became much worse. Their final stop as hostages was Yekaterinburg's Ipatev house. A local announcement was made on the local newspaper by Bolshevik War Commissar Philip Goloshokin, in charge of the family's incarceration at Yekaterinburg, which stated, "All those under arrest will be held as hostages, and the slightest attempt at counter-revolutionary action in the town will result in the summary execution of the hostages." Pro-royalist soldiers called Whites were advancing on Yekaterinburg, and they feared the family would be rescued. While the Romanovs dined on July 16, 1918, the family and their servants were forced into the cellars where they were executed. Survivors from bullet wounds were killed with butts of guns or bayonets. This event marked the assassination of several allies and relatives around the country. The result was 27 deaths in 84 days. A few days later, the official Bolshevik newspaper announced the execution of the Tsar, where they called him the personification of the barbarian landowner, of this ignoramus, dimwit, and bloodthirsty savage. They attempted to keep the murder of the royal family secret, but rumors spread, and the Bolsheviks claimed they had moved the Tsarina and her children for their protection. The bodies were mutilated and burned with acid to impede identification. They were buried in secret graves in the forest. The Red Revolution had earned a brutal reputation in and out of Russia. Socialist and communist ideas, which were distrusted before, were more so after the overthrow of the Romanovs. King George V of England was Nicholas's first cousin. Though his death was met with sorrow, confirmation the family was massacred could have prompted political backlash and a military response. The Whites tried to prove the royal family were all killed, which would have severely damaged Lenin's image as a wise leader. It was not until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 that the bodies of 5 of the family members were found and given a proper burial in St. Petersburg Cathedral. In 2015, DNA tests were completed with material taken from the bones, which proved these indeed were the remains of the Romanov family. So when this whole thing started during the Ides of March, when he abdicated his position, and it was all downhill, really downhill from there. Besides their deaths, I mean, Russia was taken over by the communists, and it was a very bad time. So absolutely, that was a bad thing there. Then the next event is back to 1939, Ides of March. Germany occupies Czechoslovakia. Nazi troops seized the provinces of Bohemia and Moravia. It began with the German annexation of the Sudetenland in 1938. By the end of 1944, all of Czechoslovakia was under their control. Next bad event was in 1941, the deadly blizzard on the Great Plains. Spring was technically 1 week away when the most severe blizzard in modern history struck Minnesota and North Dakota. People were out and about since it was Saturday night. Then suddenly winds started to gust at 75 to 85 miles per hour. The cold front enveloped the northern Great Plains in 7 hours, and in some locations temperatures dropped 20 degrees in less than 15 minutes. Most of the 151 who died were caught traveling in their automobiles. Wow. Then, 1952, world record rainfall. Almost 74 inches of rain fell in 24 hours on the island of La Reunion in the Indian Ocean. This set a world record. That's a lot of rain. Next one, this is 2003, identification of sudden acute respiratory syndrome. After accumulating reports of a mysterious respiratory disease afflicting patients and healthcare workers in China, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Canada, a heightened global health alert was issued. The disease became famous under the acronym SARS. Interesting. This next one is up to debate, but I'm pretty sure it was the Ides of March. An asteroid hit the Earth and wiped out the dinosaur. This was concluded in 2022 by researchers. According to Nature, experts used an extremely powerful X-rays and carbon isotope records of the bones of fish that died less than an hour after the asteroid hit, have concluded that the asteroid which killed the dinosaurs struck the Earth in the spring. How much you want to bet it hit on the Ides of March? There you go. So yeah, next time you're going to do something important, look at the calendar, make sure it's not the Ides of March. Next story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction stories, is Lovely and Unlucky. Late on the afternoon of October 7th, 1949, a 26-year-old bit-part actress, Jean Elizabeth Spangler, left her Los Angeles home, which she shared with her 5-year-old daughter and other family members. This was the last ever seen of Pretty Jean. Jean Elizabeth Spangler was born in Seattle, Washington on September 2nd, 1923, and had appeared in minor roles in Hollywood films and early television. She married Dexter Benner, had a daughter, Christine, born on April 22nd, 1944, and when the couple divorced, he was granted custody of the child, due in part to Jean's infidelity during the marriage. Benner also cited her lifestyle as a party girl that did not coincide with being a good mother as part of the divorce suit. He denied Jean access to Christine. Eventually, Jean won custody of Christine in 1948 after a tumultuous custody battle. The judge gave Jean the benefit of the doubt and said the child's place was with her mother, and the ex-Mrs. Benner's questionable conduct was something of the past. On October 7, 1949, Spangler left her Los Angeles home about 5 p.m. Her mother, who lived with her, was out of town, and Christine was left with her Aunt Sophie. Jean's brother Edward and his wife lived with them in a residential complex on Colgate Avenue. Jean told her she was meeting Dexter to talk about child support payments that were late, and then after she was going to work on a movie set. At a farmer's market near Jean's home, a clerk saw her and later told authorities she appeared to be waiting for someone. It's believed she was the last person to see Jean Spangler alive. 2 hours later, after leaving, which would have been around 7 p.m., Spangler called home and spoke to her daughter, Aunt Sophie. She explained she had to work for 8 hours on a night shoot and probably would not be home that evening. Jean never returned to her home, and the next day Sophie filed a missing persons report. Police followed up with all the studios, and it was found that none of them were working with Jean on any project. They weren't even open the evening of October 7th. Dexter Benner said he had not seen his ex-wife for several weeks. His new wife, Lynn, provided an alibi when she said he had been with her the whole time during the evening that Jean left her home. 2 days after Jean disappeared, her purse was found near the Ferndale entrance to Griffith Park in Los Angeles. A strap was torn, and the police believed Jean had been the victim of a robbery. This theory was discounted when Sophie, her sister-in-law, told them Jean had no money in her purse when she left that evening. What was found inside was an unfinished note addressed to Kirk, which read, quote, "Can't wait any longer, going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away." End quote. When Jean's mother returned, she told police that a man named Kirk had come to pick up Jean a couple of times, but he never got down from the car. Every doctor in Los Angeles with the surname of Scott was questioned by the police, but none had a patient by the name of Benner or Spangler. The search for the mysterious Kirk also came up empty. 60 police officers and 100 volunteers combed the 4,107 acres of the park, but nothing further was found. Jean's dirty laundry was aired out once more when police found that during her marriage to Dexter, she had been unfaithful with a man named Scotty, but she ended the relationship when he beat and threatened to kill her if she left. According to Jean's lawyer, she had not seen this man since 1945. What authorities found strange was that actor Kirk Douglas called the investigators while he vacationed in Palm Springs to tell them Jean had a small part in Young Man with a Horn, an unfinished movie in which he had the leading role. He also told them he was not the Kirk mentioned in Jean's note. When he was questioned by police, he said that she was just an extra and that he didn't know her personally. What police suspected was confirmed by a friend who told them that Jean was 3 months pregnant and spoke about having an abortion. Investigators visited Jean's favorite nightclubs and learned there was an abortionist, a one-time medical student known as Doc, who ended pregnancies for a hefty fee. Authorities now suspected Jean suffered from complications brought on by a botched abortion and had died. The mysterious Doc was never found, nor anyone that had actually met him. Rumors surfaced that Jean was seen in Palm Springs in the company of Davy Ogle, known as Little Davy, a gangster with ties to Mickey Cohen. Jean had once worked as a dancer at the Florentine Gardens, which was owned by mobsters. Ogle, who was under indictment for conspiracy and was free on $25,000 bail, disappeared 2 days after Jean did. Had he fled with Jean in order to avoid prosecution? Strangely, another Cohen henchman, Frank Nicoli, who was free on a $50,000 bond, also disappeared around the same time Ogle did. Police would go on to find out that Nicoli was killed, and Ogle was set to end up in the same lime pit as him. A customs agent in El Paso reported seeing Davy Ogle and a woman who looked like Jean in 1950. A clerk in the hotel where they were seen identified Jean from a photo. Neither Ogle or Spangler's name were on the registry, and outside of this sighting, there were no other for either of them in El Paso. This was the time after the Black Dahlia murder, and police speculated Jean Spangler might be a victim of a series of murders connected to the mutilation death of Elizabeth Short, to which she had a resemblance. Police came across a gas station attendant who said a man driving a blue-gray convertible with a man matching Spangler's description had stopped to buy gas on October 8th. The man said they were heading to Fresno, but as they drove off, the woman cried out, "Have the police follow this car." By the time police arrived, the car was long gone. Steve Hodel, author and one-time LAPD homicide detective, believes his father, Dr. George Hodel, murdered Elizabeth Smart and Jean Spangler. He claimed that the district attorney was attempting to tie together the murder of Jean French in 1947, Elizabeth Short in 1947, Gladys Kern in 1948, and Jean Spangler's disappearance in 1949. Hodel was a suspect in his secretary's murder, and he was arrested for raping his own daughter. He was also known for performing abortions for Hollywood's jet set. Hodel explained in his book that the Kirk in the note was Dr. Eric Kirk, arrested for performing abortions days before Jean disappeared. He believes the note was letting Spangler know she needed to find a new doctor. The purse was found about a quarter mile from Dr. Hodel's home, and Hodel's brother remembered their father was dating a beautiful actress named Jean around this time. Hodel had been arrested on October 6 on charges of incest filed by his daughter Tamar, and bailed out the same day. Jean Spangler disappeared 48 hours later. Nothing was ever proved against Hodel. Like Jean Spangler, Frank Nicoli, and David Ogle have never been found. Hodel moved to the Philippines in 1950 and returned to the United States in 1990. He died in 1999 at the age of 91. So again, this woman disappears. No trace, nothing. Did she run off with a gangster? Was she killed by this Dr. Hodel? Was she maybe they got, maybe did Kirk Douglas have something to do with her? And like they said, maybe the abortion, something went wrong, and they just said, whoa, we're not supposed to be doing this to begin with, and plus a dead body, get rid of it. Or maybe when they picked up Davy Ogle, guilt by association, she's there with her gangster boyfriend somehow, and they're ready to get rid of him, and they're like, you too, honey. Wrong place, wrong time. You never know. But here it is, many, many, many years later, and no one has ever been able to verify one way or the other what happened to her. Okay. And next story, this is out of the debrief, and it's titled, Archaeologists Unearth New Clues That Could Help Solve Centuries-Old Lost Colony Mystery. In 1587, John White and a group of approximately 115 English settlers landed on Roanoke Island off the coast of present-day North Carolina. The colony they sought to establish marked the second attempt to create a long-term presence in the New World under the direction of Sir Walter Raleigh, who instructed them to establish a city bearing his name in the vicinity of Chesapeake Bay. However, much like the earlier failed effort under Governor Ralph Lane in 1585, White and his fellow colonists soon began to face challenges that included strained relations with the region's indigenous inhabitants. With hopes of garnering additional support for the colony, White sailed back to England, leaving his daughter Eleanor Dare, her husband Aeneas Dare, and their infant daughter Virginia, the first English child born in America, behind on Roanoke Island. By the time he returned in 1590, following delays imposed by the Anglo-Spanish War, White found the settlement had been deserted. The only potential clues regarding the whereabouts of the colonists had been the inscription of the word Croatoan, carved into a palisade along with the letters CRO, found carved into a nearby tree, seemingly in reference to a nearby island located 50 miles to the south. For centuries, historians have attempted to resolve the mystery of Roanoke's famous lost colony. Theories about the fate of the colonists range from their assimilation with local indigenous tribes to the possible death resulting from attacks by them. Others have proposed that the colonists may have died in a failed attempt to return to England, or even that their fate may have been linked to the arrival of the Spanish prior to White's return in 1590. For White, the inscription left at the deserted colony were clear evidence of the colonists' relocation to Croatoan Island. An agreement had been made that in the event of their departure, they would leave behind a secret token indicating their whereabouts, or if they were in peril, they would instead leave a cross papier indicating such circumstances. While the true fate of the settlers remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, recent evidence uncovered by archaeologists is bringing researchers closer than ever to a definitive answer about what happened to the 16th century colonists. Recent excavations by the First Colony Foundation, a North Carolina 501c3 nonprofit organization, formed in 2004, have reportedly unearthed evidence of a farmstead near the Elizabeth Gardens in Manteo. The farmstead is believed to be associated with the indigenous Algonquin village of Roanoke. Last summer, remnants of Algonquin pottery from the 1500s, along with a copper wire earring believed to have been made from drawn copper brought from England, point to possible contact between the local tribes and English settlers. Dr. Eric Klingelhofer, Vice President of Research at the First Colony Foundation, said that the discovery of pottery alongside the copper earring, which was likely worn by an indigenous warrior, could be a veritable smoking gun in the search for answers to the fate of the lost colony. Finding domestic pottery, the type used for cooking, in close proximity to an apparent piece of Native American jewelry strongly confirms we are digging in the midst of a settlement. Klingelhofer said in a news release that appeared on the nonprofit organization's website. The copper ring indicates contact with the English. Earlier this year in March, further excavations at the site revealed the presence of charcoal, along with additional evidence of Algonquin pottery, which Klingelhofer and the First Colony Foundation believe supports the theory that Roanoke was a palisaded village where warriors resided within the walls while working-class families lived nearby on farmsteads. Klingelhofer says that artifacts unearthed during excavations over the last year are important, but emphasizes that it's their relationship to different soils which are evidence of links to the past, and together that's what tells the story. Altogether, the recent findings are helping to provide what may prove to be potentially crucial information on the interactions between English settlers and indigenous groups along with North Carolina's Outer Banks during the late 16th century, which could help assemble the missing pieces of the lost colony puzzle and ultimately resolve the question of whether the colonists integrated with indigenous communities. The new evidence also supports the idea that Roanoke was a site of significance at the time and likely served as a tribal seat for a local chief who presided over the areas of modern-day Dare County, Roanoke Island, and parts of the mainland. The First Colony Foundation says it's planning additional explorations at Fort Raleigh National Historic Site, which could lead to additional evidence that may help determine what became of the first settlers and their fate. Interesting. But you know what? For them to, who knows what could have happened to those settlers? And maybe you had some of the Indians arrive and there was a piece of the copper there and they picked it up. If I was gonna guess at it, I would think one of two things. Maybe a portion of them died maybe from disease, or Indians just did away with the men, kept the children and the childbearing age women. And they're not stupid. They probably transported them somewhere into the interior, like because they probably knew the other ones are going to come. All right, like get them out of here, so they're not going to be seen and nothing like that. And that was it. And then of course maybe they did go to this Croatoan island, but still, life might have been difficult. The weather, disease, a number of things. Or if you're one of these, and everybody's dying around you, and it's like the only way we're going to survive this is if we go and live with the natives here, because if not, we're going to be dead. When are the people from England coming? Who knows? I personally think that whoever was left, they just got rid of the men and the older women and kept the children and the younger women, and that was that. End of story. Bye. They just took them away somewhere, and they just integrated them into the tribe, and that was it. Now, what would be it? Well, what would be interesting, and I don't even know how many of the original people, the indigenous ones that live there, to do a DNA test on them and see if they show any type of history, in their DNA makeup, which would show that. Yeah, I think that would be difficult or impossible, because there's just it's been too long. That's a long time, over 400 years. But anyway, there goes that. All right, next story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and this one is titled Mysteries of the Lake Michigan Triangle. The Great Lakes has served as passage to the Atlantic Ocean for hundreds of years. There's an area between Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to Ludington, Michigan, and south to Benton Harbor that has its history of mysterious disappearances comparable to the Bermuda Triangle. The first known ship to go missing on Lake Michigan was Lake Rifon, which disappeared in 1679 while on her maiden voyage. It's estimated 1,500 ships have wrecked in Lake Michigan, but only 300 have been found. There's a triangle that has accounted for numerous mysterious events, beginning in 1891 when a three-masted schooner named the Thomas Hume set off across Lake Michigan from Chicago headed for Muskegon. It was mid-May when she disappeared with a cargo of lumber and a crew of 7. She rode in concert with one of the company's other schooners, the Rouse Simmons, which would itself be lost in a terrible storm on Lake Michigan in 1912. Soon after she sailed, a sudden squall came up, and other ships, including the Rouse Simmons, came back into port, but not the Thomas Hume. Since no debris was found from the ship, there were many theories as to what her real fate was. Speculation ranged from the crew stealing the ship or that it was struck by a freighter and sunk. The owners offered a $300 reward for information on the ship, but no one ever came forward to claim the money. 3 months after the ship was lost, a bottle was picked up on the beach near Benton Harbor, Michigan, that read, quote, "We, the undersigned, are passengers on the Thomas Hume. The schooner's hold is rapidly filling with water, and we have no hope of escape. We are on the St. Joseph course and have been drifting for hours. We have friends in McCook, Nebraska, and Elkhart, Indiana. Please notify them of our fate. Frank Maynard and Wilbur Grove." Unquote. The truth of what happened to the Thomas Hume came to light in 2006 when Taras Lysenko with A&T Recovery came across the wreck. The find was coincidental since the search was for old Navy planes from World War II in the lake's southern end. The Thomas Hume was mostly intact due to the frigid waters, but it was found far out in the lake at 145 feet of depth. Her hull was whole, but all 3 masts were broken. So there you go. It was found. Maybe, who knows? The 3 masts broken, sounds like it got caught in that bad weather. The next ship is the Rosabelle ship mystery. The ship was built in 1863 and was one of the few schooners still sailing on the lakes in the early 20th century. She left in mid-October 1921, bound for High Island, and was due to return with a cargo of lumber, cedar, and potatoes. It was planned this would be the last trip for the season. Remember, the Great Lakes, they ice over in the winter. The schooner was owned by the House of David, who on October 29, 1917, 4 years to the date, had lost another steamer, the Rising Sun, that had also left High Island. Like the Rosabelle, she was on her last trip, and she went down off Pyramid Point when she encountered a storm. 6 passengers and a crew of 20 were able to get ashore. Many feared the Rosabelle was lost after a very severe storm swept through Lake Michigan. She was found 42 miles east of Milwaukee, floating upside down in the middle of the lake on October 30th. There was no trace of any of the crew. Some wondered if she had been hit by an ore carrier, since she was traversing the lane most vessels took on the lake, even though no ships reported hitting her. The stern was broken off, and all the rigging was floating around her. The lifeboat was gone. She was captained by Erhard Gleis, and had picked up the crew on High Island. The exact number was not known, however, the number would be changed to 11 and over 25 according to the House of David. This was not the first time the Rosabelle had encountered disaster. In 1875, she was caught in a gale, her cargo was a total loss, and the cook was washed overboard and drowned. The captain and 5 men were rescued. In 1884, the boiler exploded, instantly killing Captain Charles Applegate, his son, and John P. Hayne, the engineer. It wrecked the boat. The owners of the ship lived on High Island, where they ran a timber cutting and truck farm operation from 1912 to 1927. The House of David was a religious group founded in Benton Harbor, Michigan in 1903 by Benjamin and Mary Purcell, both Adventists. They were millenarians, which was a movement that believed there would be a radical change in society after a major cataclysm or transformative event. The members were required to take a vow of celibacy before being admitted, as well as agreeing not to cut their hair and living communally. The High Island farm grew potatoes and other root crops, highly valued by the members who were vegetarians. Their group would go on to leave the island in 1927 after their sect leader, Benjamin Purnell, was involved in a sex scandal. At its high point, 120 to 150 persons lived on the island. They ran an amusement park in Benton Harbor. Present day, the 3,500-acre island is unoccupied. Months after the loss of the Rosabelle, parts of her cargo, including life preservers, washed on shore. However, none of her crew or passengers were ever found. So, no lifeboat, boat overturned. What happened to them? Maybe they tried to make it up, but even from the lifeboat. Next one, this is the disappearance of Captain Donor. On April 28, 1937, Captain George R. Donor spent the day guiding the OS McFarland, a 130-ton coaler, around ice floes in Lake Michigan as she traveled between Sheboygan and Port Washington. According to the crew, the lake was calm, but around 10:30 p.m., a blood-red moon came over the horizon. They would later recall that between the rising of the moon and 1:30 a.m., Captain Donor disappeared from his cabin. He was last seen at 10:20 p.m. in his cabin. Upon arriving at Port Washington Harbor, the captain was signaled to bring in the boat between the piers so she could be tied to the docks. Crew members knocked on his cabin door, but it remained closed. They searched the galley and then the rest of the ship, but he could not be found. Charles Riker, the first mate, then took command and brought the steamer in. The captain's cabin was next to the pilot house, and the crew had a clear vision of the door and could not remember him leaving. Fearing Captain Donor had suffered some type of health problem, the door was broken in. He was not there. To add to the mystery, Captain Donor was too large to fit through the 2 portholes in his room, and the door was locked from the inside. The sheriff was called and told of the mystery of the captain's disappearance. The crew said the captain had not slept for 4 days since the ship left Eerie. They dismissed the suicide theory, claiming he was not that kind of man. The ship's officers did tell the sheriff the captain was worried because the vessel's fore and aft compasses were not functioning right. This was the captain's first voyage in 2 years. The ship's steward said the captain came to him that last night and said he didn't feel well and asked him to stay in the cabin with him through the night. The steward, though, remained in his own quarters. Captain Donor had been sailing the Great Lakes for 25 years and came from a seafaring family. He was a first cousin of the late Captain James Donor, a former secretary and manager of the Rice Steamship Company who passed away in 1936. The lake shore was searched in case his body washed up, but nothing was found. Donor's disappearance remained unsolved until this day. What happened to this man? No sleep, he felt ill, never know. Next one, this is the disappearance of Northwest Flight 2501. In 1950, Northwest Airlines Flight 2501, with 58 people on board, crashed into Lake Michigan. A tragedy, no doubt, but the mystery surrounds the fact that the DC-4 has never been found, and the reason for the crash remains unknown. The plane was used during World War II as a transport plane, and the evening it went down, it had left New York's LaGuardia Airport, bound for Seattle. The pilot had requested to descend to 2,500 feet at 12:13 a.m. because of a severe electrical storm which was lashing the lake with high-velocity winds. He was denied due to traffic in the area, and after this the plane disappeared from the radar. The crew was Captain Robert C. Lynn, 35, co-pilot Vern F. Wolf, 35, and stewardess Bonnie Ann Feldman, 25. The passengers included 27 women, 22 men, and 6 children. Both pilots were well-trained and experienced. Approximately 2 hours later, 2 policemen reported seeing a red light hovering over Lake Michigan, which lasted only 10 minutes. This observation would later be used to claim they had seen a UFO. By dawn, it was presumed the plane had crashed. The U.S. Navy, U.S. Coast Guard, and police from surrounding states joined in the search. At 6:30 p.m., the Coast Guard found an oil slick, aircraft debris, and a logbook floating in Lake Michigan, far from shore. The following day, a naval vessel near the slick found strong sonar targets. Floating debris was recovered in a 4-mile radius, which included a fuel tank float, seat cushions, clothing, blankets, luggage, cabin lining, and body parts. 2 weeks later, portions of the bodies of 2 women were found. One 2 miles north of South Haven and the other about 7 miles north at Glen, Michigan. South Beach, a popular spot, was closed for over a week after the crash due to the large number of body parts that washed ashore. 6 months later, the cause for the crash was listed as unknown, and it has never been changed, nor has any major piece of the plane ever been found. At the time, it was the deadliest commercial airliner accident in American history. In September 2008, members of Michigan Shipwreck Research Associates, MSRA, were working with author and shipwreck hunter Clive Cussler to find the wreckage of Flight 2501. Valerie Van Heest and Chris Lyon with MSRA interviewed former personnel from the Coast Guard who recalled that body parts were taken to their station in St. Joseph, and Louis Kurlikowski, the Berrien County coroner, took charge of the remains afterward. Lyon found a single handwritten line in the sexton's register indicating the place of the mass grave. It was dated July 3rd, 1950, and read, "Body parts from airplane crash." What was left of the passengers was cremated. Their families were never notified. There was speculation if this was done purposely. The family of 47 of the 58 passengers were found and advised of the discovery and invited to attend a ceremony where a black granite marker was erected at the Riverview Cemetery with the names of the passengers and the words, "In memory of Northwest Flight 2501, June 23, 1950, gone but never forgotten." In 2015, another mass burial site was found in Lakeview Cemetery in South Haven. Marianne Frazier, the sexton, noticed a listing dating to 1951 for burial of Northwest Airlines crash victims in the register. Like the other location, it was unmarked. St. Joe Monument Works donated a tombstone for the site and had it in place a few days before the 65th anniversary of the crash. Remembrance service was held at this cemetery as well. Now, the only thing I see wrong is why wouldn't they... I understand that maybe back in 1950, forensics wasn't enough, but, to do that mass, and they say body parts you don't know, but not to tell the family at least, or to have some type of service, said, "We don't know if this is part of your family member, but we're going to inter this in a mass grave if you want to come." But anyway, next stories. Lake Michigan standing stones. The mystery of the triangle has been blamed on bad weather, bad judgment, bad luck, UFOs, and a line of stones stretching for a mile, 40 feet below the surface of Grand Traverse Bay. They were discovered in 2007 by Mark Hawley, professor of underwater archaeology at Northwestern Michigan College. One stone set apart from the others has a carving resembling a mastodon, which went extinct 10,000 years ago. The stones have been dated to about 7,000 BC, which predates Stonehenge by 4,000 years, and was 2,000 years after the Ice Age ended. A similar structure was found in Lake Huron. It's believed to be a corridor that connected northeast Michigan and southern Ontario when it was dry land, and was used for hunting. The limestone corridor is 9,000 years old. There is a possibility the site in Grand Traverse Bay serves the same purpose. Dr. Hawley has kept the exact location of the stones a secret, citing security reasons. So, there you go. I'm torn with that. Not telling anybody where it's at exactly because you don't want maybe the scene to be disturbed. Okay, even though it was discovered, almost 20 years ago, versus if you don't have the ability or the funds to do it, allow others. I don't know. I'm torn about that. But anyway, there you go. It's also, by the way, called the Black Triangle. It's not only the... Okay, and this other story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction story, is titled "Mystery of Child's Murder Solved After 62 Years." In 1960, Sharon Lee Gallegos, 4, was kidnapped by two persons, a man and a woman driving an old model green car. Despite a good description of one of the kidnappers and the vehicle, as well as reporting it right away to the police, the child's fate remained unknown for 62 years. Alamogordo, New Mexico, July of 1960. Within hours, police set up roadblocks across southern New Mexico with a description of the kidnappers and the vehicle they were driving. They also reported Sharon as having light brown hair, light complexion, and brown eyes. She was wearing pink shorts and white shoes. In September, she would have celebrated her 5th birthday. Sharon lived in a modest white frame house with her mother, 2 older siblings, her grandmother, and 6 other young Gallegos children. A playmate told police an old green car stopped and a woman asked Sharon to come with her and offered to buy her candy and clothes. The child refused and the woman grabbed her arm and dragged her into the vehicle. A neighbor described that the past Sunday after church, an auto fitting the description of the car was parked in the alley. The kidnapper was described as a short, overweight woman in her 30s with dirty blonde hair and wearing a faded cotton wash dress. The woman asked the neighbor where Lupe Gallegos lived. The man with her appeared to be between 30 and 40 years old and was described as slender, with straight, sandy-colored hair, and he had a long, prominent nose. The neighbor pointed out the house, and the woman said she was looking for Mrs. Gallegos in order to give her work. The neighbor said the strange woman also asked if Mrs. Gallegos had a little girl, whether or not she had lots of children, and if the entire family lived in the house or if it was divided into apartments. Inside the dirty car were two children, a young girl and a freckle-faced boy. Another witness, an 11-year-old girl, noticed the car, which was thought to be a 1951 or 1952 Dodge. She told authorities that the woman just sat and stared toward the house and didn't move when she stood in the kitchen doorway. She described that earlier she had gone to the neighborhood grocery with Sharon hours before the abduction, and that Sharon, upon seeing the green car, expressed fear and asked to be picked up and carried as they passed the vehicle. The FBI joined in the search for the child, even though ransom was ruled out since the family was from modest means. Mrs. Gallegos discounted that Sharon's father could have kidnapped her. She said, "I met Frank when he was stationed at the airbase near here, but he was transferred away before Sharon was born. He has never written or shown any interest in the child. I don't think he would want her. He does not even know her." At that point, authorities believed they were dealing with a child stealing case. A week after the kidnapping, police found her father, a former airman living in a southeastern city, working as a telephone company employee. He was married and had two children. He knew nothing about the kidnapping. On July 31st, within weeks of Sharon's kidnapping, a Las Vegas school teacher and his family were rock hunting when they found a dead child in a sandy wash off Arizona 93 in southern Yavapai County. Her body was badly decomposed, and the autopsy failed to reveal the cause of death. There were no marks of physical violence, no broken bones, no puncture wounds or bruises. A pocket knife found nearby was sent to the FBI laboratories to determine if particles on the blade were dried blood. At the death scene, officers found two sets of footprints. One set was made by a man's shoes. The other set could have been made by the thongs the child was wearing, indicating the girl probably walked to the death scene. A set of automobile tire tracks were found, which indicated that someone drove off the road and turned around in the wash. FBI agents ruled out the possibility that who they had dubbed Little Miss Nobody was Sharon after comparing footprints. The police had no leads in establishing the dead child's identity. A Yavapai County police officer offered the theory that the child belonged to a transient family and died of natural causes. The family, due to lack of funds, did not report the death or bury the child. Residents in the nearby community of Prescott raised money for a funeral and florist, and a mortuary donated their services for the little girl they had dubbed Little Miss Nobody. Funeral services were held on August 10, 1960 for the child. While the mystery of who stole Sharon Lee Gallegos and the identity of the little girl found in the desert lingered, Richard Arlen Lindsay and Dixie Elaine Lindsay were arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Rosemarie Riddle, 6, in California. Upon their arrest in January 1961, they were questioned regarding the disappearance of Sharon. Lindsay worked as a migrant worker, and this work carried him back and forth across the Southwest about the time Sharon was seized. Richard Arlen Lindsay, 30, was an alcoholic drifter from Texas with a history of violence against his family. He'd been arrested and sent to different mental facilities for short periods of time. Dishonorably discharged from the Army at the age of 18, just after 9 months of service, he spent half of the next 12 years in prisons in Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma for car theft, grand larceny, and taking a woman across state lines for sexual purposes. He'd been married 6 times. The first marriage was when he was 16, each marriage ending in an episode of violence. In 1960, he re-met his third wife, Dixie, in a bar in Texas, and they began living together again. They both had married other people during the time they were separated. The couple lurked around the Shafter Farm Labor Camp, which was 15 miles from Bakersfield, California. Dixie Elaine Cheshire Lindsay, 26, was 8 months pregnant with either her third or fourth child when she lured Marie Riddle from her home, offering her $1 for doing housework. She sat in the back seat of the car while her husband raped and choked the child in the front seat. He then walked off with the girl and left her in a nearby field. He wasn't sure if she was dead, and she said, "If you don't do it, I will." She grabbed a tire iron and struck the girl 19 times. The couple's picture was shown to the witnesses who had seen Sharon's kidnapping, but they were unable to identify definitely if those were the persons, even though there were several similarities in appearance. Dixie Lindsay weighed 208 pounds at the time of her arrest. The FBI found that she had dyed her hair dark when she was arrested in California. The most striking similarity was in the sharp nose of the man who drove the abduction car. Also, the Lindsays had children traveling with them, which corresponded to what the neighbor had described. Investigators in California advised authorities the Lindsays had changed cars a number of times traveling from Texas to California. Robert Bird, a resident of the trailer court where the family lived, said the car the child got into had out-of-state license plates with white digits on a blue field. These plates could have been from Arizona, Nevada, Arkansas, Indiana, Alabama, or Connecticut. Bird said he was certain they were Arizona plates. In January 1961, Lindsay was sentenced to death for the murder of Marie Riddle. He was executed in San Quentin's gas chamber in November the same year. Dixie Elaine Lindsay was sentenced to 2 life terms without the chance of parole. On March 22nd, Dixie gave birth to a son which was given in custody to her mother, Mrs. James Shesher. It appeared the labor camps were dangerous places for children. In June 1961, Donald Ray Riddle, 23, Ronald Earl Riddle, 19, and a 17-year-old Luth Olive Wasco were being held for investigation of rape and contributing to the delinquency of a 14-year-old girl. According to the police, Ronald Riddle and the 17-year-old boy were charged with rape, and a contributing charge was filed against the older brother. The Riddles were brothers of Everett Riddle, whose 6-year-old daughter Rosemarie was kidnapped and murdered only 6 months before by Richard Lindsay. Despite the tragedy that had visited their family, they themselves were predators. Then, in October 1963, an 11-year-old girl was lured away from the DeWitt labor camp where Marie Riddle had been living when she was killed. The girl was kidnapped and raped by a ranch worker who lured the girl into a car with a $1 bill. Elmer W. McCoy, 46, was charged with kidnapping and rape. He was found a short distance from the camp gate in a car in which he was bringing the child home. He died in 1983, age 66. Once the headlines faded concerning the Lindsays and the heinous crime they committed, there was no further information as to why they were excluded as suspects in the murder of Sharon Lee Gallegos. In 2015, the child's body was exhumed for DNA examination, and eventually there was a match to one of Sharon's living relatives. Fast forward to March 15, 2022, and according to DNA evidence and facial reconstruction, the 62-year-old mystery of the child found in 1961 in Arizona was solved. She indeed was Sharon Lee Gallegos. Her mother, Guadalupe Gallegos, passed away in 2011, and her sister Ramona Chavez in 2017. Why the woman who stalked her was so persistent and openly targeted her is unknown. That she was stolen in broad daylight only a few feet from her home indicates this crime was not one of opportunity. Also, why she was driven 500 miles away and killed remains a mystery as well. Technology helped solve another murder and cold case that occurred close to where Sharon Lee Gallegos' body was found in 1960. In August 2023, almost 40 years since Catherine Esposito was killed while hiking on Thumbbutt Trail in Prescott, her killer was confirmed. On June 13, 1987, Esposito, 23, was bludgeoned with a wrench, shot with a .22 caliber gun in the eye and head, and stabbed. Hikers heard her scream but couldn't get to her in time. DNA evidence indicates that Brian Scott Bennett, a 17-year-old high school student, was her murderer. He shot himself in the head in 1994, and he was exhumed in 2022 to retrieve DNA evidence to analyze. He was also connected to other murders in the area. He was a perpetrator of rape on the same trail in April 22, 1990, where he had killed Esposito 3 years before. He was accused by 2 more sexual assaults in Yavapai County, where he threatened to kill the victims. So yes, DNA does have its place, and it makes you wonder, way back when they found this child, why. The only thing I can think of is that sometimes it's different jurisdictions, and we think of it, it's weird, but I can see where they would say, well, even though they theorize that she was killed in Arizona, was she killed in New Mexico, was she killed in Arizona, but then the Lindsays were being prosecuted in California. And let's face it, he got sentenced to death and he got gassed, but at least they could have charged him, I guess. Or maybe they didn't have enough proof. Maybe they said, yeah, we know these were the 2 that kidnapped this kid, but All we have are some eyewitnesses that are not sure because they've looked at pictures of them. And besides that, we'd have no actual physical evidence. Maybe that was it. Either way, at least if that was them, which it sounds like it was, they got their just desserts. A horrible thing, though. So, there we are. We will be back soon with some more interesting and eerie news. Give me a few days. There's always eerie news, weird stuff going on, and I will be back with you guys. Till then.